One of the interesting things about this age of AI is that trust is hard to scale. In classical economic theory, you can establish trust and scale it through transactions because each side knows what the other side gets. That's not true with AI. It's not true with large language models, and I will tell you why it's not true. You can't see what the intelligence is on the other side when you buy it. This has caused a host of issues. Just this past week or two, there was a big kerfuffle over message limits and Cursor and what Cursor's pricing was going to be and how that was going to change, and developers got upset. Then after that, I saw people getting upset about Claude Code and claiming that Claude Code had somehow degraded behind the scenes or wasn't counting message counts properly because it wasn't transparent. I saw people asking Sam Altman out of OpenAI, please, please, please show me message counts so I can see how close I get to my limit. And it's not just about counting messages. That's actually very solvable. It's something deeper underneath where model makers' incentives are not aligned with us, the people who are using them. They're absolutely incentivized to make big claims about being the best in the world because that unlocks press releases, stories, and dollars. We explored this when we talked about Grok 4 and their claims around test results that weren't borne out when actual users used the product. There is a wider trust gap across AI that I want to talk about today, and I want to give you some specific heuristics or rules of thumb that I use when I'm evaluating claims from specific AI labs because they have a different trust fingerprint. They're not all the same. In order to get into that story, I want to give you the latest example of a somewhat sketchy claim from a major model maker. It happened just this weekend, and it's the International Math Olympiad gold medal claim from OpenAI. The implied probability of this happening at all was around 20% on Polymarket. So you could consider this, even by LLM standards, a big surprise. And the tech community reacted with enormous excitement. Everyone was like, this is incredible. It's even more incredible because OpenAI claimed that it was just a large language model. It was not using tools, so it didn't open up a Python notebook to solve this, and that it was given the exact same time constraints as a student. And so they were given 100 minutes to solve the problem, and the machine was able to do it in that time and was able to write out a proof that was then validated by multiple independent mathematicians. At first glance, this sounds like a legitimate story. And the gold medal, by the way, is for answering 5 of the 6 International Math Olympiad questions correctly. And if you are wondering how hard they are, I looked at them and got a headache. They are ridiculously hard. Very, very few students in the world get a gold medal at the International Math Olympiad. They change up the questions every single year, so these are not last year's questions. So you could not train on these questions previously. These were novel to the LLM and everyone else in the world. That was the claim. Now we dive into the rest of the story. It transpires that there is a marking guide from the International Math Olympiad organization for the 6 questions that were posed to students. That marking guide is private. It's only available to qualified examiners. And because OpenAI chose not to participate with other AI organizations that were taking this test as AI, notably Google, they did not have access to that marking guide. So when they published their results, which they did, they published the entire output of the 5 questions out of 6 that the AI answered on GitHub. You can see it. They did not have that marked by the qualified marking guide. And that generates all kinds of questions because you don't know if the marking guide might have taken a point or two off for the way it answered the question or for the quality of the chain of thought. You don't know what you don't know because you don't have the actual examination marking guide. And that matters because the gold medal claim was barely a gold medal. It was like 1 or 2 points over the bar because it got 5 of the 6 questions, not all 6. This was not a slam dunk gold medal. It was a skin of your teeth gold. It gets even weirder. The Math Olympiad not only put out a statement saying they didn't participate with the other AI organizations, notably Google, and they also didn't use our marking guide or our examiners who know these problems and are trained to mark them. They also said very explicitly, we asked AI companies for the sake of the human students who are taking this test to please not make a big deal out of PR on your gold medal today. over the weekend. Give the students a week of glory because they are the humans who are working so hard to take this test. I think it's something like 50 students in the world get the gold medal. It's a big, big deal. And they wanted them, the organization wanted them to have their moment of honor, which is really worthwhile. And Google appears to be abiding by that as a participant officially in the process. And OpenAI, which did not officially participate in the process, but published their answers, appears to not be abiding by the Math Olympiad's request, nor do they have access to the marking book. I am not qualified to tell you if they successfully passed those 5 questions. There are very few mathematicians who are. One of them is one of the world's foremost mathematical minds, Terence Tao. And he weighed in on the whole problem set here and why it's so complex to evaluate. And I want to summarize his thinking just a little bit because I think it's easy to understand, even though he's obviously far smarter than me. What he said is that the way you set up an examination profoundly shapes the results. And so he said on the actual Math Olympiad, there's a coach and there's students, and the coach's job is to advocate for the answers for the students, but the students themselves are left to their own devices for 100 minutes with pencil and paper only to answer the problems. So they can have advocacy after the fact by their coach, but it's on them to answer. And then he started to give examples from actual AI technologies to help you understand how things can be very, very different when you set a large language model to take the test. One example he gave was, would it influence the test if all of the students got together and started to point each other in the right direction, give each other hints? Yeah, it absolutely would. That is also known as mixture of experts. It's a standard LLM technique where you have multiple LLMs together taking the test. That might have been what happened. We don't know what the architecture of this model was. This wasn't regular ChatGPT. Sam Altman has since clarified it wasn't ChatGPT 5. We're not sure what it was. We also don't know if the perception of time matters to an LLM in the same way. And so for a student, we know what 100 minutes means. It's considered, as crazy as it sounds, because I'm sure I couldn't do this, it's considered a reasonable amount of time to answer the question. I'm sure I would not get nearly far enough. I wouldn't even get to the beginning. I looked at these problems. They're impossibly hard. But for an LLM, it doesn't run on clock time. In fact, they're famous for not running on clock time. That is part of why this concept of digital twins works, is that you can run millions of hours of simulation in a very short amount of clock time when you are simulating robots walking through a warehouse and trying to train them. That's a real example from NVIDIA, by the way. If clock time doesn't work the same for large language model simulations, is giving an LLM 100 minutes actually equivalent to giving a human 100 minutes? I don't know. And Terence doesn't know either. And his point was not, this is not an achievement. His point was, it's really hard to understand what's in the box of this achievement if we don't have more details. And OpenAI has not released those details. And people have been going after OpenAI for a while on the lack of transparency. That is part of their trust blueprint DNA. They make claims, they publish some of the results of the claims, they launch models that are quite good in practice, but they do not reveal what's in the box or how it works. The chain of thought you see on O3, that is not transparent. That is a sanitized chain of thought, and they have decided not to release it. And so if you think about what's coming up next for OpenAI, the launch of ChatGPT 5, if you think about the upcoming launch of their open weights model, which they have delayed again, I start to see these kinds of claims from OpenAI in the light of their trust fingerprint. I start to read it and I start to say, this is a model maker that values press releases. It values public relations. It will jump to get the PR victory ahead of any kind of request that it gets to hold things back. It moves fast. And so when the International Math Olympiad said, please wait for the students, Sam didn't wait. And he pushed forward because he had an amazing story to tell, and he wanted to be the first in the market, and he wanted to beat Google to the story. Another mathematician weighed in on this, by the way, and said that generally speaking, having evaluated the results from OpenAI, the machine showed lack of creativity and weird notation and technically solved the problem. And then he went on to say, well, creativity is really important in mathematics, and it's notable that the 6th question was not even attempted because The sixth question is the most creative and challenging of them. And his conclusion was, it doesn't look like, as a mathematician, LLMs are going to be taking my job anytime soon. And I think that's a really interesting take. And I think it's possible to articulate that take without denigrating or without minimizing the value of the achievement. It is absolutely true that a large language model not using tools, getting any kind of close to gold medal on a Math Olympiad problem set, even if it has all of these caveats, that's a big deal. If Google announces they also got a gold medal later this week, that will be just as big a deal. And the rate of progress can be important, significant, and worth studying without having these huge existential questions off the top. And I think one of the things that makes the tech community that is too bullish on AI unloved and frustrated, unloved and incredibly annoying to other people is the sense from the rest of the world that they just think AI is the way forward. I saw Flame Wars on X, which, well, that's where you go, right? That's what you get. But I saw Flame Wars on X where people in tech were basically saying, none of you get it. This is the way AI is going to run the world. None of you deserve jobs. AI is just going to do all your jobs for you. One, that's not a way to make friends. And that's not a way to, get your technology adopted. And two, it's not even reasonable. We are in a world where it may be possible that AI has a gold on the International Math Olympiad, but also can't really play Mario Kart properly. My kids may be better at Mario Kart than AI right now. And people will say, well, just wait a minute. And I'm like, yeah, sure, wait a minute. But let's at least acknowledge that the intelligence is kind of jagged and it's a strange world. And it's not at all clear in that world what that means for employment, except that so far, and I saw yet another study come out on this weekend, there is no discernible effect on employment for AI. So nothing has happened yet, despite all of the hot air back and forth. Let's look briefly at some of the other labs and evaluate their trust fingerprints. Let's look at Meta. Reports jumped over the weekend that as big as the $200 million pay package was that Mark Zuckerberg offered and that was accepted by someone to come to Meta. I think that was the biggest headline. I think they all vary between $10 and $200 million, which is just generational wealth, right? It's incredible. Apparently, at least 10 researchers at OpenAI turned down, the rumor goes, $300 million paychecks. $300 million. That is more than most professional athletes make. That is Shohei Ohtani money if you're a baseball fan. So the reason I'm calling this out is that this is part of Meta's playbook. If you're looking at the trust fingerprint for Meta, they are very heavily into spending money to catch up aggressively and making sure that they can back up their demos, even if their demos were in the move fast, break things spirit initially. So Llama 4, widely panned. It promised a massive context window. I think it was 10 million tokens. That window is not remotely usable at 10 million tokens. It is not clear when Llama 4 Behemoth is going to be out. It may never be out. Mark Zuckerberg saw that. He saw his public AI statements fall apart, and essentially he started to see the developer community shift away from Llama as Chinese models came out. Kimi K2 came out recently, phenomenal model, that started to eat away at his open ecosystem vision. And his response was classic Mark. I'm going to go spend money to solve this problem, and I have more money than God, so I'm going to spend as much money as I need to. Have $300 million. You get $100 million. You get $50 million. And he's going to assemble whatever it takes. The challenge is, historically, Meta can spend the money, but Meta can't buy the passion. And so as much as Zuck has never lost over the long term, yet, Zuck has also not assembled teams that are passionate about anything but social media. And I think that is a very open question. He's paid all these people, but the people who said no may be the people who are most interesting in this scenario, because those are the people that chose passion and the startup fit over $300 million. I don't know if I could do that. I don't know if a lot of people could do that. They must believe profoundly in the OpenAI vision, because Sam was very open. He didn't match it. Like, they're not getting paid $300 million by OpenAI. And so in that world, I think my question is, can money buy the kind of team that you need to build super intelligence, if that's even possible? I don't know. We're all going to find out, but that's classically Mark to try and build it that way. The trust fingerprint for Meta is very demo leaning. It's like the VR AR days where everyone mocked Mark, and then he spent a lot of money to bring Oculus into the world and to improve the AR race and basically to start beating Apple at AR. and VR. That's how Mark works. And so now he's in the money phase of this pendulum that swings back and forth. And that means there's going to be a big demo coming up that's even more interesting. And we'll see if that actually puts Llama back on track. Llama 5 is going to be a big deal. So if you sum it up, Meta, demo first DNA. OpenAI is going to win the PR war, and they're going to hide the how. What about Anthropic? Anthropic is an interesting one. They have extremely careful work. They have some of the most interesting work on AI ethics, some of the most interesting work on showing and proving how AI works in the industry. But they also have some of the most unbridled and unsupported optimism I've seen. The example of Claude managing the vending machine is great. I talked about this earlier. I won't do the whole story. Basically, in the middle of managing a vending machine, Claude had a psychotic break, hallucinated that it was a real person, and did not pull itself out of its funk until April 1st when it told itself it was an April Fool's joke. This was all carefully documented by Anthropic. To their credit, they didn't hide it. They were really honest. And then at the end, they had this wild optimism about how Claude is going to be a middle manager soon. And I looked at that and I said, that does not line up with the rest of this paper. But boy, does it line up with the kind of optimism that I see from Anthropic and that I see from Dario Amodei all the time. Dario is the founder of Anthropic, and he is known for writing the essay Machines of Loving Grace, where he talks about his vision for the future, how it's very utopian. The team does phenomenal, focused, careful work, and then slips in that sort of utopian and idealism by the by, right? And that's just part of their fingerprint. They do careful work, and they have kind of careless optimism. It's a really interesting combination. What about Google? With Google, it's all about technical excellence. They literally have Demis Hassabis, a Nobel laureate, on the team. Like, they're extremely good. They are the ones that built the underlying technology that we're all building on for the AI race now, but they could not hold the team together. And so they've gone on to found other startups. And that's very, very high level how we got OpenAI. They are obsessed with building AGI. Demis has said there's multiple breakthroughs needed. He's not done yet. They're focused on scientific models. Mathematicians will tell you they think the Google models are stronger on mathematics, which is part of what makes this weekend's Math Olympiad results extra spicy. But their interface is not what they like to claim. And so if you see claims from Google, I tend to believe that technically speaking, it was exactly what they said, that the APIs are going to be served correctly, that it's going to be the most affordable intelligence in the industry. And I assume the interface is going to be terrible, whatever they say, because I cannot recommend the Google Studio interface to anybody. It's so hard to use. And it shouldn't have to be that way. It shouldn't have to be that way. But every model maker has a fingerprint. Every model maker has a trust fingerprint. With Google, I can trust that they measure things. I cannot trust them to build an interface. And frankly, I also think they have a little bit of the challenge that xAI faces, where they tend to optimize to tests, and the actual intelligence that's available isn't always at the same working quality as the tests. It is not nearly as big a delta as I sense when I work with the xAI models, but it does feel like it's there, and it's worth bringing up here. xAI and Grok. I've talked about them with the Grok 4 release. We're not going to spend too long on this. Think of them as an opacity engine. They are passionate about building AI. The team works really, really hard. They're super fast at releasing, but they are so opaque. They're so opaque. They'll gesture toward open intelligence, but they won't release a model card. They don't adequately solve huge trust issues. I don't know of a single company that would trust them with their API as a result. And when you just optimize for benchmark scores, you also get users saying it's not as flexibly intelligent as it needs to be. Building AI is really hard. It's okay that they have spent 2 years building, and they are in the top echelon of model makers, even if they're not number one. But that's not okay for them. They need to be number one. And so with them, it's a tremendous delta between what they claim and what actually happens on the ground. It makes them very difficult to cover from a news perspective because you don't know what's real. And they're very good at grabbing the headlines. Now, I want to close by talking a little bit about the domain expertise problem, because I think it collides with this trust issue. One of the reasons why it's hard to know how to measure intelligence, I'm going back to the very beginning of this conversation where I talked about this idea that in economics, you can transact and you know what you're getting, and you don't with intelligence. One of the reasons for that is that the people building intelligence are approaching it like code. They're approaching it technically. They're approaching it with what they know in the valley. But the people who have domain intelligence in all of the fields AI is touching may not know code, may not know tech, but sure do know their domain, and they know when it's right and when it's wrong. And so part of why I shared the Math Olympiad results and the opinion of mathematicians like Terence Tao is they are domain experts in mathematics. I'm not. OpenAI sure isn't, but they are. And it's interesting to me that domain experts do not align necessarily with the claims AI model makers make, except in one field, and that field is code. And the reason why is because the people building AI are also good at code. And so as much as we say the reason AI is getting better at code fast, it's because of reinforcement learning and because of the great rewards that running code gives to models, like it runs or it doesn't. What a fantastic reward for a model that trains on reinforcement learning. Well, at the end of the day, it may not just be that it happens to be good for training models. It may be that the people building the models know code and they don't know other fields as well. And I think that this is going to become more and more important in this next 2 or 3 years of the AI revolution, because more and more and more, we are going to expect if we purchase the intelligence, it's doing meaningful work. And it's going to be domain experts outside of tech that assess that meaningful work. And if it does or it doesn't, it's going to be on them to say, not on the labs. But the labs have tremendous incentive to say they're good. And so we see what is effectively an implicit conflict where OpenAI is taking a victory lap and awarding themselves the gold medal and feeling great. And they did clearly make some kind of breakthrough. And so they probably feel internally like they earned it because the answers were apparently correct. And mathematicians are much more cautious. They're like, well, we don't understand how this was done. We don't know the testing methodology that you use. We don't understand the model. And critically, even looking at the proofs themselves, something feels weird. It feels less creative. It feels like it's unclear why it attempted 5 but not 6, which was the more creative problem. And in their lived experience with mathematical models so far, they aren't seeing significant gains. And the tech people tend to dismiss that. They tend to say, you're domain experts for now, but you just wait, give us 6 more months. We're going to be domain experts over here because AI is going to solve it. They've been saying that 6 months away for a while now, and the models keep getting better. And the true domain experts like Terence aren't changing their tune. They keep saying these models are getting better, but not necessarily in ways that are profoundly helpful to me yet. I think we need to listen to them more. So wrapping all of this up, the only way I've found to establish trust in a model is to use some of these rule of thumb to understand where you can trust and where you can't. And so for OpenAI, I trust the models I have in production now. Where they do useful work, they tend to be good. I do not take their claims super seriously when they're not in production yet. For Meta, I tend to assume they're running on a 2-year pendulum, and sometime next year they're going to come up with something amazing because they bought their way to it, but it still won't be clear if it's cutting edge. For Anthropic, I trust them to do the best white papers in the industry, but I don't necessarily assume that their wild optimism is correct. For X, I don't trust them with a lot right now because xAI has just hidden so much. And for Google, tremendously competent models, but it's hard for me to trust them to build off of the models onto an intelligent surface that other people can consume because they just haven't shown UX skills. So that's my benchmarks. Other people may have different benchmarks, but I wanted to share this is how I'm parsing and developing rules of thumb that help me make sense of this world where I have to buy intelligence kind of sight unseen. Does that make sense? Put in the comments what you think would be a heuristic for buying things sight unseen for models. Cheers.